Okay, thank you. Professor Bolzoni just guided us through a fascinating journey. Indeed, we traveled with Orlando and the other characters from Ludovico Ariosto's epic through the mirror of the images that over the centuries have captured the multifaceted nature of this amazing work. Now, I would like to explore another question relevant to the reception of the Orlando Furioso. What happens when Orlando goes on stage? Or to put it differently, what happens when the printed page of the Orlando Furioso, possibly the most successful epic of the European Renaissance, becomes a stage? And I hope you don't mind my playing a bit with the slides. I think I was a set designer in a different life, and what happens when the heroes and heroines of Ariosto's epic are brought to life, specifically in opera? When their voices become truly audible, when their talking becomes song? Well, one possible way to answer these questions is to think that, in fact, the performative nature of the text was indeed crucial to Ariosto's own poetical invention. For sure, Ariosto conceived the Orlando Furioso as a poem to be read, but it is all too clear that the poet had in mind not only the possibility to read the poem aloud, but also the possibility to sing the poem. On the one hand, the Orlando Furioso was but the ripest fruit, one could say the most refined literary reshaping of a long-lasting tradition, a very popular one, namely the tradition of singing epic poetry, a tradition that had been blossoming throughout the Middle Ages. Street singers and poets would be improvising on the piazzas of Italy, indeed on the piazzas of Europe, singing to the lyre or to the lute, narrating stories such as those of Roland and the other paladins of King Charles. On the other hand, as the finest product of this popular tradition, as soon as it became a canonical work, a veritable classic, to use Daniel Djewicz's phrasing, the Orlando Furioso offered all sorts of materials for adaptations of many kinds across different mediums, among which, starting around 1600, opera. The extremely rich tradition of musical adaptations of Ariosto's Orlando Furioso includes works by composers such as Francesca Caccini, who brought Ruggiero and the enchantress Alcina to the court of Florence. Jean-Baptiste Lully followed in her footsteps, bringing the same story to Versailles, at the court of France. And after them, composers such as Handel and Vivaldi both made sensations in the Baroque theaters of London and Venice, with their many operas based on the Orlando Furioso. Forests, enchanted islands, labyrinthine palaces where the destinies of the various characters intertwine, with singing and music as the magic tools used by composers to cast their own spell upon the audience. Indeed, all sorts of magic is possible when chivalric poetry becomes opera. The dynamics of power, desire, loss, and alienation that lie at the core of Ariosto's Orlando Furioso have found new shape through musical settings as well as through changing patterns in performance practice. Piling up one over the other, these various layers constitute a body of interpretations that join the long life of the text by asking new questions and proposing new answers. And this is the game that the opera, which we are presenting today, composed by Roberto Scarcella Perino, Furiosus, and which is coming soon to New York, invites us to play. So for Flora Gagliardi and Roberto Scarcella Perino, it all happens, as we have seen and heard, on the moon. According to the librettist and composer of Furiosus, it is in fact on the moon that Ariosto's poetical invention continues to inspire the desires and frustrations of men and women who, since the first appearance of the Orlando Furioso in 1516, have laughed and suffered in rhythm with the heartbeat of its many colorful characters. A veritable dream, the opera Furiosus, moves from one episode in the poem that is perhaps the most emblematic of Ariosto's poetic imagination: the rescue on the moon of Orlando's wit by his fellow paladin, Astolfo, who flies riding a hippogriff several centuries before Harry Potter. So, made mad by love, but it would be more correct to say made mad by jealousy, assuming these two passions are separable one from another, the hero Orlando, busy with a long-lasting fight against the Saracens, loses his proverbial wisdom. Dirò d'Orlando in un medesimo tratto cosa non detta in prosa mai né in rima, che per amor venne in furore matto, d'uom che sì saggio era stimato prima. Ariosto declares at the beginning of his poem, I will tell you something extraordinary about Orlando, the wisest among the paladins, who lost his mind because of love. Led by untamable frenzy, Orlando spreads death and destruction after finding out that the beautiful Princess Angelica, powerful embodiment of desire, whom he has been chasing across the globe, well, Angelica, the princess, has eventually preferred to marry a very simple soldier, Medoro. Orlando's wit, as all things lost on earth, ends up on the moon, preserved in one of the innumerable crystal bottles that only poetry's magic can bring back to earth. In the version of the episode narrated by the libretto of Furiosus and set to music by Roberto Scarcella Perino, the content of the 5 bottles found by Astolfo on the moon is made, and I am repeating what our tenor has been singing earlier, is made of sospiri d'amanti, il senno dei pazzi, il tempo sprecato, preghiere mendaci, la fama perduta, lovers' sighs, madmen's wit, wasted time, mendacious prayers, lost fame. Opening the bottles one after the other, Astolfo brings to life stories and characters that populated Ariosto's imagination. These are among the most significant episodes from the Orlando Furioso. Angelica, the beautiful princess of Cathay, desired by all men who chase her relentlessly, rejects all of them and chooses Medoro, thus making Orlando mad. Bradamante, warrior woman, ancestor of the Este family, the Dukes of Ferrara, to whom, by the way, the Orlando Furioso was dedicated. Well, she runs after her fiancé, Ruggero, whose fate combines glory, fame, and death. Protected by the magician Atlante and seduced by the enchantress Alcina, Ruggero will eventually reunite with Bradamante, thus achieving the narrative frame of the Orlando Furioso. Now, in order to give a sense of the variety of passions and emotions that populate Ariosto's poem, the opera Furiosus draws from other bottles too. Anger, represented by the conflict between Orlando and Rodomonte, and tragic love, which finds a voice in the tearful story of Fiordiligi and Brandimarte, separated by war and united by death. Inevitably, Furiosus is made of episodes, which of course brings up the question which Professor Bolzoni was exploring in terms of choosing how to transform, how to adapt the piece, either trying to bring all the stories together or selecting. So inevitably, Furiosus is made of episodes, materials freely extrapolated from the 46 cantos of the poem, and yet this opera resists narrative fragmentation. It is characterized by unifying features. In fact, a carefully constructed structure preserves the thematic and stylistic specificity of the various threads. Ariosto's narrative, which is potentially centrifugal, is made here consistent and tight. In Roberto's score, Astolfo hangs in the balance between singing and spoken declamation. He sings to the moon, we have heard that as well. He tells us the story. He reveals the content of the bottles, while also interacting with the other characters. One of the many dabbles of Ariosto within the poem, Astolfo, whom the literary tradition had portrayed as amiably inept, seems to give a voice to a certain kind of reason, all human, made of common sense, accessible and enlivened by the disenchanted wisdom of someone who is sympathetic towards the other, not without irony and a little sarcasm, yet not without great genuine compassion. The libretto plays freely and creatively with Ariosto's text, which is alluded, reinvented, transformed. Similarly, Roberto's music moves swiftly across tunes, sounds, rhythms, and motifs, which echo musical traditions of various kinds. Ballads and laments reconnect with the lyric dimension that informed the voice of the characters in Ariosto's poem. The poetical rhythm, fluid and inexhaustible, of Ariosto's stanza, the famous ottava rima, is dismantled and reassembled through the librettist's inventive versification. Free verse, strophic forms, hybrid material, like magical shapes readapted in various ways, words that rhyme as if they were repeated notes. Well, the verbal text is shaped by the musical setting, which challenges the words and manipulate them in all sorts of ways. The most enjoyable flair of Roberto's melodic invention is never predictable, though. Indeed, it surprises the audience a lot. When we have the impression that Ariosto's characters are speaking and moving according to the rhythm of a tango, that is the moment when the upbeat of their heart changes. It floors us, and we are amused by sounds out of place. Ariosto was not familiar with Giacomo Puccini, but to us, who read the Orlando Furioso beyond modernity, I should say well beyond modernity, what is the matter with lovers who sing about happiness in ways that resonate with the notes of Rodolfo and Mimi in La Bohème? That's totally fine. And it is exactly in the possibility of a translation that makes the original text live through the echo of other texts, other voices, other sounds, that lies the magic of Furiosus. Certainly a kind of magic that Ariosto himself would have enjoyed. Thank you very much.
Thank you.